Hello, lovely people. I am super excited to talk about this topic today. So when I first heard about this, it immediately resonated with me, and I figured I'd talk about this from the perspective of a high achiever, because that's one of the identities I feel like I'm needing to let go of. So I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I have been thinking about it for a couple of days after I listened to this podcast, but before I get ahead of myself, we're going to be talking about identity and shifting identities and letting go of identities and what that means and what it feels like, and kind of a few things to think about if you're kind of in that space. A few days ago, I was listening to an episode of the Almost 30 podcast, and they had Bozoma Saint John in there. And if you're not aware of who she is, she's a very dynamic and magnetic woman of color, a Black woman. She used to be the chief marketing officer of Netflix. She also worked at PepsiCo, I believe Apple Music, Beats, and she was kind of in a season and has been in a season of letting go. And so when she was talking about identity in this podcast, oh my God, I was oh my God, are you reading my life? It felt so on par on how I've been feeling recently. But before we get into that, I wanted to just give a primer on what exactly is identity. So our identity encompasses our experiences, our values, our relationships, and all of those things that make us who we are. Our identity gives us our sense of self, who we are becoming. In this episode of the Almost 30 podcast, Bose kind of goes into this idea of having different types of identities, and how her identity, she had to let go of, not just an identity, but a title in particular. She had to let go of a title when she left Netflix. She kind of talked about the power of letting go of a title or identity, because typically holding on to an identity can give you power, but she wanted to flip that and talk about how letting go of an identity gave her more power. So I'm really excited to get into this topic a little bit more. In the podcast, Bose actually goes into the given identities that were given being in this world, and their chosen identities. Given identities are things that we can't necessarily change. We came into this world and they were given to us. So I think of that as for me, my given identities are: I am Black, I'm a woman, I'm an American. Those were what were given to me. And of course, we all know that it is possible to change some of your given identities, but in essence, these are the identities that you're given once you come into this world. And our chosen identities are ones that through our experiences, through our life, are the ones that we choose for ourselves. And so for me, some of the identities that I've chosen for myself include: I identify as a traveler, I identify as a foodie, I identify as a creative soul, I identify as an introvert. The biggest identity that I've been holding on to personally is my identity as a scientist. I've been holding on to that so tightly. I feel in the last couple of weeks, I really have to start letting that identity go. Letting go of this identity wasn't an immediate reaction. It's been coming about over the last couple of weeks because I don't feel it's serving me the way that it used to. Part of the reason why I chose my identity as a scientist is obviously because I loved science. I loved studying science. And for me, being a scientist also came with a sense of prestige. I guess I wanted people to be impressed with the fact that I'm a scientist. I don't know what exactly that is. I feel that identity of me being a scientist, I've been holding on to because I value other people's opinions. I value what people think of me. And I think that's completely normal. Everyone has that to some varying degree. And as I've gotten older, I've realized how little that does for me. I've also noticed this as I've been applying to jobs. There is in case you missed my last video, I talked all about, being fired and what I've learned through that experience of unemployment the last few months. But as I've been applying to jobs, I'm showing them a specific identity, one that will fit with the company and for the job. And at times I feel the identity I'm showing them doesn't resonate. it's kind of exhausting, like constantly having to quote unquote like prove yourself that you can do a job. Nothing that we're doing is rocket science. So like, it shouldn't be this difficult. So really all I can do is share the identity of who I am, what I can do and what I can offer and what I value, and hope that it resonates with them. And I think that anyone who's gone through the unemployment process or just generally applied to jobs, it kind of gets tiring and you get fatigued from constantly having to like explain what you do and how you do it, and then it just not resonating. And I think in these past few jobs, I've only been applying to like science marketing types of jobs because I get to show them my scientist identity. And you'd be surprised how much like marketing companies don't really actually care. I've come to realize that my identity as a scientist has to do way more with my values and how my values show up. So obviously like prestige is something that I value, and I think that's okay. We all have different values for different reasons. I also value curiosity, and I also value kindness. Like those are other values that I have. And I believe that, the values that we have can show up in a variety of different identities. So it's like, I feel like I can let go of the identity of being a scientist and make room for or replace it with another identity. But let's be honest, letting go of an identity is really hard. I feel like I'm still in the middle of it, but it feels very uncomfortable to let go of an identity. And I feel uncomfortable even talking about it in some degrees, but I feel like this has been coming for maybe some time now. And you might be wondering what happens when you let go of your identity. Do you disintegrate? Do you flourish? Like what actually happens? And I think that's just part of the learning process. Like I don't think any of us will actually disintegrate into a ball of nothingness, but it actually like leaves us open to so much more. And I actually liked what Bo said in the podcast about like taking power from letting go of an identity, because I think that's the mindset you have to be in to let go. Like there's so much power in assuming an identity, but there's also so much power in just like letting go of an identity, because you're making space for so much more to come into your life, and also allowing yourself to grow in a new and different kind of way. Also, I think it's just kind of exciting. Like you get to see yourself evolve into a different form of yourself, and you don't know what's going to happen. And I know for some people that might, bring about some anxiety, but for me in particular, I'm kind of excited to see where this goes. So there's, some nervousness, but there's still so much potential from letting go and seeing what happens. So if you're in a place where you feel like you're in the process of letting go of an identity, I wanted to leave you with a little bit of encouragement. I think it's really important to actually feel the pull and kind of go with it. It's kind of like just going with the flow. Like you feel like something needs to change, and like actually moving forward towards that change, I think is really scary, but actually continue to feel it. Another thing that's really important, I think, in this process is to lead with curiosity and excitement. And I already talked about excitement a little bit before, but the curiosity piece, I think helps lessen some of the anxiety, because I think all of us is part of life and part of growing up. Like we need to learn how to let go of some of the identities that we're holding on to. And if we can just use a little bit more curiosity and excitement, I think we just open ourselves up to way more possibilities. Another thing that I think is important to remember, that all growth requires some sense of change. And it might be like really uncomfortable to go through this process, but again, there's just so many possibilities and so much potential, and you never know what's going to be on the other side of this, but also what kind of experiences you might have, what kind of people you'll meet. So just remember that with any sort of growth, there will be change. If you want to learn more about identity or have any other topics in mind, just leave me a comment below, and I'll see you in the next one. I feel like I have to like point it towards me. I feel like that, excuse me. Oh, okay.